Today we're in Madrid, Europe's third biggest city, which at over 2,000 feet is the highest capital city in Europe. And snows have recently fallen, and some Madrileños have been skiing between the Prado and the Plaza Mayor. And apart from Real Madrid Football Club being named as the world's most successful football club of the 20th century, Madrid's history, culture, and education imbue it with great richness. And of course, then there's the nightlife. Ernest Hemingway, in his novel Death in the Afternoon, noted, nobody goes to bed in Madrid until they've killed the night. They stay up late, but they get up late. That's not nightlife. That's delaying the day. But this afternoon, I'm joined by Santiago Iniguez de Onzoño, president of IE University, which for 3 consecutive years has topped the global league tables for online education, and whose business school is one of the world's top 10. He is one of the 500 global LinkedIn influencers and has been portrayed by the Financial Times as one of the most significant figures in promoting European business schools internationally. He was the first European to be appointed as Dean of the Year by the world's leading business school publication, is a professor of strategic management, holds a degree in law, a PhD in moral philosophy and jurisprudence, an MBA from IE, and is the author of 5 books, including How Business Schools Are Reinventing Education, and co-editor of Business Despite Borders, Companies in the Age of Populist Anti-Globalization. So as Benjamin Franklin said, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Señor Santiago de Onzoño, bienvenido a Money Podcast. Es un gran placer tenerte aquí hoy.
Thanks so much, Simon, and thanks very much for welcoming me in Spanish and for your very nice introduction about our home city, the home of our university, IE University here in Madrid. So thanks very much for inviting me.
Pleasure. Let's start with your upbringing. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your education.
Well, if I look back, I don't have the sort of orthodox education from an academic standpoint. You know that academics normally are trained in a very linear way. So if you pick, for example, a professor of finance, they should have a PhD in finance, publish in financial journals, and be related with other financial peers. I actually have, as you mentioned, a PhD in moral philosophy, a degree in law, and then I did an MBA, worked as a consultant. So I have done many different things. I have enjoyed most of them. But I guess that this very diverse background has provided me with the opportunity to learn more about people and probably put into practice many of the things that I've implemented over the past 30 years at IE Business School first, and then when we created IE University at the 5 schools that we currently run. So I'm passionate about education. I truly believe that education is the major engine in order to make our world more fair, more just, more equal. And of course, education is the way how people can actually become what they envision, what they dream about doing, how they can actually achieve their own dreams and goals.
So you were a consultant, but you drifted into education. Now, did you actually drift, or was it part of a master plan?
No, I guess it was a call since I was a child, actually. I tortured my siblings, teaching them when we were all 6 years old or 8 years old. I picked the books that we had at home, particularly those which we had 2 copies of some of them, including one by Sigmund Freud. So I distributed, the books and asked them asked my siblings what they thought about some particular statement. And since I realized about how engaging is education, how much you can learn, not just by preparing your sessions and doing research and trying to convey the sorts of knowledge that you develop, but also how much you can actually learn from your students. Many people don't realize that education is actually a 2-way of learning. And sometimes we learn more from our students than the other way around.
So let's turn to the IE Business School. And to set the stage, IE is ranked as one of the world's top 10 business schools, as I mentioned, and its online MBAs have been ranked #1 in the world by the FT and Economist for 3 consecutive years. So maybe let's just start on a little recap on the history and the evolution of IE.
Sure, and I've been very lucky to work with the IE founder, Diego del Alcázar Silvela, who created IE Business School first, almost 50 years ago when he was only 23 years old. He was an entrepreneur and then joined some other entrepreneurs and created the first business school then in Madrid. He had a vision from the very start of building up an internationally oriented, cosmopolitan, entrepreneurial education center. And in fact, IE Business School first, and then IE University has educated most of the CEOs now running large corporations here in Spain or in Latin America or increasingly in the rest of the world. We have also contributed to disseminate the entrepreneurial culture across many different places. We currently run, for example, more than 28 venture days across the world in major capital cities. So this is a place, IE Business School and IE University, where things happen fast, because in our DNA is actually this entrepreneurial spirit, which was inseminated by our founder. And if you ask and if you meet the people who work here at IE, you will find very quickly this entrepreneurial spirit. The FT, the Financial Times, once described us as a group of young people in a hurry, because we had a sense of mission. We wanted to transform first our environment and then the world. So IE is actually a place where we develop knowledge, actionable knowledge. We deliver programs in many different areas, from architecture and design to human sciences and technology, including global and public affairs, law, and of course, business and management. But we plan to expand the studies at our university in the future. Actually, one of the major things happening soon in the fall is the opening of a new campus in downtown Madrid, which is going to be a vertical campus, a 35-story tall building surrounded by the other towers of the area, where we will provide a unique experience to our students, combining different programs and providing them with different spaces, from venture labs and entrepreneurial rooms to laboratories to design spaces. So it's going to be actually a unique experience for our faculty, our staff, and of course for our students.
Well, I went onto your website and I viewed what you describe as your wow room, which, as somebody said, looks a little bit like something from Tom Cruise in Minority Report. It's quite an extraordinary sight of being able to teach all those people with these multiple sort of screens. That must have cost, first of all, a lot of money. But tell me a little bit about why you appear to have been early in this online provision of learning.
We entered online learning more than 22 years ago, at the time when the other leading universities, particularly in the US and the UK and in other few places across Europe. But at that time, online learning was seen as a massively distributed, low quality, tutor-led sort of education. And what we tried was actually replicating the same model in terms of quality and excellence that we were able to deliver in presence, face-to-face. So since we have developed a number of methodologies and platforms and formats that allows us to probably convey even a much richer experience than the one that you can actually attend and experience in a presential face-to-face sort of methodology. And we have discovered also that participants using these sorts of blended hybrid formats develop many more skills than just the ones that they put in practice in a traditional classroom setting. Let me just put you an example. In traditional classrooms, those who are more extroverted tend to take the lead, and they normally consume most of the time in a classroom composed of 50 participants. Whereas in a blended setting, in a hybrid format, those who are more introverted, but most of the times more creative and innovative, can actually participate more often. They interact in asynchronous formats, in chats, in fora. And the result, the aggregated result in teams and in the class is much richer. The discussion is deeper. The learning is much higher. So the results, both for the group as well as for participants, are much more better than in traditional settings. Of course, I mean, technology, I always say, is a way to humanize education, to personalize the learning process. So this is what we have discovered over the past 22 years of practicing these hybrid formats.
So a new campus, physical, is being established, a robust online presence. Some might say, is there a contradiction? And I'm going to quote Professor Neil Ferguson, who came on the show in December, and in a fascinating conversation, one of his quotations was, "You do learn better in proximities to one another in social networks, as well as in hierarchies of pedagogy, but we can definitely make the university of the 21st century much better than it currently is." So if we just break that into two components, how do you think about those two elements?
It's very nice that you mentioned Neil Ferguson, since I've met him a number of times, and we had a very interesting discussion last time he was in Madrid about the effects of how internet and searches through Google and some other search engines condition and bias sometimes the findings in academic research. But having said this, let me just argue, with virtually with Neil Ferguson. And in our experience, hybrid formats and these sorts of blended education stretches the learning process and enhances the whole quality of learning. It puts into practice many more different skills in participants. Of course, we all need to put into practice at some stage what I call animal feedback. I mean, you need to be in the same room and even smell and breathe, the same air in order to share experiences, because education is a social activity, and it requires this social and physical interaction. But the best of the worlds is actually combining that in presence sorts of interface with online education, where the interaction in terms of intellectual exchange is much more richer, where, as I was saying before, those who may be less extroverted, more introverted, may participate more often, where you can rotate leadership, for example, or you can introduce simulations and make the many more things using artificial intelligence. So the fact is that technology, and we have seen this over the pandemic, can actually enhance the whole learning process without, of course, eliminating, we're not talking about excluding in-presence education, because that's an essential component of the whole learning process. The idea is actually to take out the best of technology and bring it into the learning process.
So if virtual education is growing inexorably, courtesy of communications, dispersed populations, rethinking, how do you think about how it gets priced?
Well, good education has a cost, of course, but my belief is that over time, and we have seen this across many different industries, technology becomes a commodity. So actually, the use of technologies across many different activities in the education experience and process is not going to enhance, to increase the cost of education. It's not going to increase tuition. Rather, it will probably make some processes that are tedious become much better solved for the faculty, for the professor, for example, in the assessment process, in evaluating the work of their students. So in fact, technology can actually decrease the cost of education. Having said this, we need to invest in preparing our faculty. And I don't think that teachers are replaceable by technology. Robots won't replace our faculty ever. And this was said actually by Bill Gates. So what I believe is that technology will make the whole learning process much richer, much more personalized, more human, more entertaining, and in time, of course, less costly and more accessible for sure.
I think it was Malcolm X who said, education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. And as people grapple with the costs, both undergraduate and MBA, how do you advise them? How should they think about that trade-off, that cost-benefit trade-off, given these costs, which are unlikely, I would argue, to fall?
Sure, and we need probably lots of initiatives, public and private, in order to finance tuition and to provide accessibility to the entire world. No, in our experience, actually, students combine a number of resources in order to face sometimes costly tuition. They may ask for loans that in time, they may return to the lending institutions. Then they may reach out to foundations and to platforms that provide also scholarships. And also universities provide scholarships themselves. In our experience, for example, many of our students coming from Latin America, Africa, Asian countries, or underdeveloped regions do normally combine these three different sources: scholarships, loans, and our own support from IE Foundation.
So I was intrigued to read a study that showed that a growing number of accountancy firms are hiring people straight from school versus university because they found greater work ethic, higher expectations of their ability to deliver, all sorts of sort of a series of virtuous things, slightly counterintuitive. And I wonder whether there's a danger sometimes that the MBA itself, and many of our listeners on the Money Made podcast think about MBAs, they think about CFAs, but I wonder whether there's an element, in which the downside of the MBA is a set of expectations that, to put politely, may be premature, and to put less politely, may be inappropriate.
Well, that's a recurrent criticism, that is targeted at MBA programs and at large, formal education. And there's some entrepreneurs whose opinions are respectable, but I don't share, which encourage youngsters to jump into the job market without passing through universities. And I guess that's an error, because you're actually missing an essential part of your personal development and education that you cannot actually get at a company. I mean, at university, our students not just get prepared for jumping into a particular job, they also get this exposure to the humanities and to knowledge that otherwise that they won't get. I mean, the purpose of universities is preparing very good professionals, but also very good citizens and people who are knowledgeable of different cultures. And I'll go to your point about MBAs. I mean, the fact is that our graduates at IE Business School, for example, are hired by leading tech companies, including our first recruiter is Amazon, followed by Google and some other of the leading tech companies, which shows that MBA graduates are still very much on demand. But a high percentage of them, particularly in these circumstances of crisis, have decided to become entrepreneurs, which again contradicts another criticism made by some that say that MBAs are not made for entrepreneurs. Well, it depends very much which MBA you pick. There are schools that convey traditional MBAs, and there are some other schools that are aimed at training and preparing entrepreneurs. And IE Business School, our mission is actually trying to prepare these sorts of professionals or entrepreneurs.
Well, I can't resist asking you that question, because this is a competitive landscape. I did an advanced management program at INSEAD. We have LBS, We know the US schools that are very highly regarded. How do you think about that competitive dynamic? And particularly within Europe, your mission presumably is to be and remain number one. And so how do you think about that?
Right. Well, to be very honest with you, being number one is not anymore, our target or our ambition, because it's actually, being number one on what particular field, no? We are different schools, and if you actually check the profile of the graduates at each of those business schools or universities, and you meet them, and I encourage very much those who are looking for an MBA to meet graduates of those different institutions. I guess we produce different sorts of graduates and with very different profiles. Some of those business schools aimed at preparing mostly consultants or people who jump into the financial services market. We are much more focused on preparing entrepreneurs. And the list of our recruiters, the range of the companies that come and hire our graduates is much more diverse, which includes, of course, the top tech companies, but also in companies coming from traditional industries. I guess what they look at IE, they look for at IE is actually people who are modest and humble. We don't train the masters of the universe, but people who are hands-on, people who are competent, cosmopolitan, entrepreneurial, and committed, people who realize about their commitment to transform the world for the better. So we are different, and the best thing to do is actually the acid test is meeting graduates of each of those institutions.
And why do you think that education is more important now than it's ever been?
Well, we realize about the many dangers that our world face, including populism. The best antidote to many of those illnesses, of course, including populism, is good education. If people are trained to become more critical, to question some of those fake news that they are served through social networks, if people realize about the differences across cultures, and they become prepared in order to run cross-cultural teams, to respect diversity and to embrace diversity. If people are more competent in terms of looking for solutions for some of these illnesses, then I guess we will probably produce a much better world. So education is actually the key for solving many of these problems, many of these illnesses. If you look actually at what is the popular base for the major populist causes, it's normally composed of those people who are detached because they don't have the skills in order to get jobs, in order to enter the modern society. They don't have the digital preparation for working in one of those tech companies, or they have lost their entrepreneurial verve, or they are just, they feel not part of the current society. And education is something very much needed in order to overcome this. This is why I very much recommend that people consider coming back to school every 5 years. We need to update our knowledge and polish our skills.
That's very, very well made point. And we're going to come back to later education in midlife a little later on. But just tell me a little bit about the business model of educating. Some of the great institutions that we know of, and we did an interview recently with the endowment of Oxford University, been around for, as we know, 1,000 years and are richly endowed. But just tell us a little bit about how the business dynamics work for running a university like IE.
Right. Well, there's a number of things which are very distinctive. For example, the diversity that you may find at our university. We have over 135 different nationalities on campus without any particular culture group having a dominant share. This means that you may learn from many different visions and conceptions of the world. We also have a very good balanced gender diversity, but we also encourage people to explore different visions of what is the good life, and of course embrace different vital decisions that are reflected, for example, in sexual preferences. So our campus is actually a place where people realize about the difference among students and among people. And that is part of the learning process. This doesn't, of course, exclude the clashes, cultural clashes. It's part of the learning process. This is not a place where people don't talk about what happens in the real world. We need to raise the hot issues that are cause of debates across the world. And this happens in class and outside class. But beyond this, of course, what we very much encourage is respecting the other, of course, accepting a number of conventions, because convictions sometimes may be very different, very distant from each other. So this is a very basic element, core element of the whole learning process, which is also reflected in the contents of teaching, diversity at large. Then, of course, entrepreneurship is also one of the core parts across all subjects, all courses, whatever you teach and learn. And then the humanities is also a common part of the whole learning. In addition of acquiring those competencies that are required by the job market in order to perform successfully at any particular job, we believe that by instilling this sense of the importance of the humanities, we actually develop much better citizens. Let me just put an example. By, for example, studying the arts or architecture, as architects do, financial analysts may become much more observant. You know how architects look at a piece of art or at a building. They dedicate some time in order to see what is the impact of the light or the water or the angles or the design or the style. Whereas normally managers are action oriented, so they dismiss things, in a very quick way, very fast fashion. So if managers actually acquire some of those skills that have to do with analyzing things from the very, very different angles, like architects do, they may take much better financial decisions. And this is just an example. Of course, if you study history, if you study cross-cultural studies, if you study music, you may understand other citizens and be able to run and to lead cross-cultural teams, for example.
Well, thank you, because that's, I think, very clear. I want to switch tack slightly. You're a school that clearly is helping many of your students think about entrepreneurship and leadership. It's one of your own specialities. You sit in the middle of Europe. The term Eurosclerosis is not new. I was looking at some industrial production data for France and Italy, which hasn't grown in over 20 years. And we had on the MoneyBiz podcast Sir Xavier Rollet, who was extremely critical and persuasive about Europe's reliance on debt, particularly debt funding for companies. And that's one of the impediments to producing the Googles and Amazons of this world. So I wondered how you thought about that, and whether the absence of labor reforms, some of the rigidities are all so structurally embedded that you are there teaching bright young people, but in fact they may disappear off to other countries where flexibility and entrepreneurship is more easily rewarded.
And I guess you are very right about the need of a number of structural reforms across many European countries. At the same time, to be very honest, Europe has been the reference for social services and social coverage. So we shouldn't actually throw everything away in the process of updating and adapting our institutions to the modern world. I guess there's a good number of systems and institutions that need probably an update. Let's look, for example, at the pensions system. As you know, it was created in the 19th century at the time of the Prussian Wars, where when actually the soldiers got back, to their home cities, and they needed a social system for covering, all their illnesses and malaises coming back from the war. Well, now people live beyond 80, and the life expectancy is going to be extended over the next year. So being retired, for example, doesn't make sense anymore, at least in the traditional fashion that we all understand by retirement. I mean, getting to a paradise and then receiving a pension. This is not conceivable anymore. And it's a sort of institution that very few politicians or people, in the public arena want to deal with. So this is just an example. We also need to revisit many other institutions in order to improve our democratic processes and the quality of life, and enhance actually human rights across all our societies. But having said this, I'm a true believer in integration, global integration, and I'm sure that we can actually implement many of these challenges in a much better way together under a European umbrella than just, from a national perspective or a local point of view. No? So what I believe is that despite all the populist or nationalist movements that we see, in time, we will also attend, again, a process of integration. I'm a true believer in the UK, coming back probably in 10, 15 years' time, coming back to Europe. I feel very much myself attached to the UK, and I was trained there. So I very much consider, myself being at home in Oxford or in London, and the UK is part of Europe as well. So I very much believe in global integration, in all the benefits and positive consequences of joining forces and building up institutions for the benefit of all.
So you've been teaching for a long time. Would you say that the student body over the last 2 decades has become more entrepreneurial in thinking and outlook?
Absolutely. And I keep teaching because it keeps me, very much on the mood. If anyone wants to remain young and skilled and agile, I very much recommend dealing with the youngsters. And probably the best environment in order to interact with the young people is actually education. So every time I begin a new course, a new section, I realize about the many talents of the youngsters. Now I'm teaching, for example, one of our global MBAs that takes place with this blended format, hybrid format, at a class composed of people with an average age of 28 to 29 years old, young professionals. It's amazing their level, their knowledge, their commitment, their awareness about social issues and about the need of transforming the world in many different ways, how hard they work, the many things that they bring into class. And as you say, I mean, their entrepreneurial spirit, their awareness about becoming their own owners and managers, regardless, the company they work for. I guess that over time, in the coming years, we will see an increase in the number of freelancers, for sure. This was already a trend before the pandemic. And we will see probably a different sort of relationship between workers and their employers, their companies.
And that leads me to leadership, because having spent my career in the investment industry, I would generally think it's fair to say that leadership at the investment banks has been poor. People are promoted from positions of traders and analysts and sales into management positions. And generally, I would say it's underwhelming, probably going to offend some people along the way. How can you teach leadership?
Leadership is a skill or an aptitude that can be learned. And I very much believe in the possibilities of teaching leadership. Of course, when we refer to leadership, many people still have, this conception of leadership, which is old, tied to Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, who used to describe leadership in terms of charisma. But we realize that this is not working in business, nor even in politics. I mean, charismatic leaders are not the best leaders in terms of solving things and creating value and leading the society for the better. And this is why we have to change the meaning of leadership and assess what are the actual skills required for running a company in the best possible way. So it's not charisma anymore. It's actually knowing your people, caring about your people, and of course, being competent and cultivated and committed. It's not charisma anymore. This is what I believe, and this is what is actually confirmed wherever we see charismatic people in politics or in business, let's be very honest. So I agree with you that we don't need charismatic leaders in financial services at all.
So you touched on re-education, and I was fascinated. I read a book called The 100-Year Life. It's a brilliant book by two, I think, LBS professors, Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott. And in fact, Niall Ferguson described it as brilliant, timely, original, utterly terrifying. I think it was out a few years ago. Retraining along the way, how important is that? There's a sort of sometimes associated with midlife crisis. What's your thinking? What's your advice?
Well, I know Linda Grattan, and we have coincided a number of times at the Drucker Forum and some other events, and we have exchanged ideas about his thesis, in this very, very recommendable book. Allow me just to say a quick thing about mid-career crisis. This is a biological fact. And the good thing about this crisis is that it passes. Once you cross the threshold of the 50-year of age, then the crisis is left behind. So my message to all those people who may be listening to this and passing, through this mid-career crisis, which happens between 40 years of age and 55, the good news is that it passes. The bad news is that you shouldn't actually take sharp decisions during this age, neither in your family environment, neither in business or at your job. You need to cultivate the golden lessons that you probably learned before. You need to keep working hard and not do strange things. Having said this, once you pass the 55 years of age, you need to realize that you have to live a second life. The 60 years of age today is the equivalent of 40 years 20 years ago. So those with 60 years have to realize that they still have a lot to learn and a long way to go. The good thing, again, is that they can reinvent themselves. They can start a second career. They may have the resources, the savings, they have the network, they have the knowledge, and probably the ambition to do something different. They may become entrepreneurs. They may devote themselves to the courses that they dreamed when they were youngsters. But for sure, what they can't do today is, think about the conventional retirement in a sandy beach, just cutting your coupon from the pension plan. So this is the sad thing for those dreamers who were thinking about surfing with 70 years of age, is that this is not possible anymore. But the good news is that you can still do lots of things in this second life that we are all given as a gift, actually.
So the good news, I think, for me is I've had my midlife crisis and it's led me into podcasting. So hopefully I can hang in there for a little bit longer. But you made a point a few minutes ago, which is that people should get re-educated every 5 years. Now, how?
Well, there are many ways. Of course, education is a sort of continuous task, and we shouldn't wait for 5 years, to keep reading or to keep learning. And learning is something that we can practice on a daily basis. There are many ways now, and technology provides lots of access to ways of keeping your knowledge updated and practicing your skills. But how can you actually update in a more radical way those very much needed knowledge and skills? Where getting back to school, if our listeners and readers are going to live over 130 years of age, they have to realize that they will probably experience 3-4 different careers. Sometimes, they will go through radical changes. They may have to change companies, maybe get 3 different degrees. And this requires, of course, getting back to school, which is actually, this brings me, to a very important thing, which is a call for universities. Universities need to focus on the adult learners. They cannot just focus on the undergraduate students. They have to realize about the potential, the opportunity, but also the duty to train the adult population, because it's going to become the major segment of learners and students in the future.
That is an interesting point. I've got a few more general questions for you, if I may. Along the way, what was the biggest obstacle that you faced, and how did you overcome it?
To be very honest, I've been very lucky, because even if sometimes I faced major obstacles, over time you tend to diminish the importance and the challenge that they represented. So normally challenges come from personal things. But if you realize that by talking, by understanding people, and using, a recommendation coming from a British philosopher, female philosopher, Iris Murdoch, she explained that the only way of knowing others is actually loving them. If you actually focus on some particular person that you may hate, and then see that person from the best light, realize about their virtues, their positive things, and every day you try to enhance one of those positive virtues or angles, then you end up loving that person. And what she explained is that the only way to fully know another person is actually loving that person. So this is a piece of advice that I guess is recommendable for all managers and for all people engaging with others at work. You need to come to love your colleagues and your subordinates or your bosses, if this is possible, because the only way of fully knowing them is actually loving them. So probably the obstacles that you were asking about, challenges and obstacles, always come from misunderstandings or lack of awareness or things that are seen in a different light, rather than real obstacles, because the real challenges are very easy to overcome.
Now, in this last 12 months of COVID, what have you running this institution got right, and what would you do differently?
Probably, the lockdown and the pandemic has been an opportunity for me to reach out to many more people than the people that you normally deal with in normal life. Because technology, one of the advantages is that you can actually set meetings every 30 minutes without moving from your office. So it has been an opportunity for me to reach out to many more people than in normal life. Probably what I would have done differently is maybe taking more care about everyone. We sometimes don't realize about the need of human the human touch, and technology still, going back to our discussion before, doesn't yet provide this warmth, this animal feedback that you have, in physical interface. So probably what I would have done, in addition of being, very active and diligent in arranging meetings and dealing with working things, would have been, dealing more with social initiatives and personal interaction, talking more on the phone. Maybe, we had time over the lockdown, and sometimes just talking on the phone, spending time talking about casual things would have been, something very much important and missed.
Good old-fashioned phone call without a video interaction has its merits. When you are lecturing, when you are listening to students who come to seek your advice, and they come to that thorny issue of two types of jobs, call it consultancy or finance, it may be, Amazon versus Google. How do you approach the answer? How do you try and help them?
It's very much dependent on the likes and the ambitions and the spirit and the whys of the people who come to me with that question. There's people who are very well prepared for becoming consultants and who are passionate about advising and realize about the career of a consultant or the need of improving financial services. And they enjoy analyzing the value of a company. Whereas on the other hand, you realize that people want to do things and become entrepreneurs or transform their environment. They have an idea of business. So it very much depends on each participant, each student. And I very much encourage them to seize their dreams and to do what they think they are prepared for, and they can be the best at performing that particular job. It's about passion, it's about preparation, it's about option, and it's about learning again, because even those who may not be prepared, they can learn a lot once they decide, to start a new career.
Now, if you had the luxury of sitting in a lecture theatre and listening to two professors, lecturers, either dead or alive, who would they be?
Well, I guess maybe Socrates would have been, because he was, we read those dialogues written by his disciple Plato, and we realize that almost everything that has become the major issues in modern philosophy is already there. So maybe listening to Socrates, being able, to attend that last lecture before he committed suicide after being condemned by the Athens authorities, would have been a unique experience. And then I guess we are lucky today because we can actually have access to the lectures of many wise people, excellent lecturers, the top professors at leading universities. So we are very lucky because of that access. No? So I guess I would pick that, but of course I would have loved, to meet many other people. I was very lucky because I was able to attend the seminars and the classes of top philosophers at the University of Oxford in the mid-'80s, when it was actually the mecca of moral philosophy. Everyone who published something important at that time was actually teaching at Oxford. And I was very lucky to be there and attending their lectures and listening firsthand about their ideas and commentaries. But anyway, again, I insist we learn sometimes even more from our students than from our masters or what they learn from me. So learning is actually something that happens every day, not just in class, but elsewhere, at home, from your children, from your friends, from your colleagues in your vicinity, with your neighbors. So it's very important to remain open for learning.
So I've got two final questions. What's your ideal day when you're not teaching and you're not at the business school?
It's normally with friends, but I also enjoy very much writing and reading. I mean, I dedicate at least one day every weekend, to get concentrated and writing, producing one of those pieces that I release through LinkedIn or that I compile afterwards in my books. So writing, reflecting, and reading is something that I very much enjoy. But of course, being with my friends, exchanging views, discussing about current things is something that I also enjoy, really enjoy.
And post-COVID, you can go to any restaurant, anywhere.
Well,
where would it be?
I have to say, we are lucky here in Madrid, because when I talk to my colleagues at some other major European capitals, I realize that probably life in Madrid these days, with a low incidence of contagion, is probably much better in terms of social life than in many other parts in Europe or in the US. Well, which restaurant? There's lots of places, here in Madrid, but there's probably a favorite of mine is a place which is very close to our campus. Abarra is the name, where they change the menu almost every other week. It's Nouvelle Cuisine. They have excellent quality. And I bring, of course, the top visits, I have to say, who come to IE campus. But again, there's lots of places where you can actually enjoy food, company, good wine, not just here in Madrid, but in London, in Paris, of course, in Rome, in the US. I normally spend time whenever I visit and travel overseas, spend time with friends over a lunch or a dinner, because that's a sort of relaxed conversation where many things happen and come, over the discussion.
Well, that's been a really fascinating and, for me, eye-opening conversation. I'm going to take away a few things: that the hybrid model of education, which we maybe thought was accidental, has much more to it in absorption and in sharing, and maybe not perhaps in intimidating some of the pupils the way that a fully live education has. I'm also going to take your point about leadership, that so many associate with charisma, but in fact is much more nuanced, than that. And that finally, vice chancellors in the UK case, but leaders of universities, need to think about the new and important market of adult learners, just as we adults need to think about, our retooling and re-equipping. So, well, Santiago, I'm going to finish with George Orwell. I started with Hemingway, and George Orwell said, "I would sooner be a foreigner in Spain than in most countries. How easy it is to make friends in Spain." Well, maybe for some listening today, they're going to contemplate some education at IE in the great city of Madrid. So thank you so much for sharing an hour with us and telling us so much of which was certainly new to me. Thank you, Santiago.
Thanks so much, Simon, and congratulations for this series.